there, folks. John here, and this is the False Takes podcast. Yes, I have settled on podcast. I don't think I'm going to do show. Maybe I'll do show. Anyways, so this is the False Takes podcast, and today we have a special guest with us, as always. And today's guest is Luke Wittel, and he is a DGA trainee. And I'll let him tell you what that's all about in just a minute. But there he is, so he can wave if he wants to. And then my co-host today is a new co-host on the show. His name is Darrell Nelson, and he is going to be doing the main part of the interview for Luke, just because he knows him a little better than I do. So, without further ado, like I said, this is the False Takes podcast, a show where we talk about art and film and the mistakes we all make along the way to creating something new. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So, Darrell, why don't you, or actually first we'll start with Luke. And we have a question that we ask everybody the first time they're on the show. And I never tell anybody about this on purpose, because you know what? I like to surprise people. So the question is, Luke, what is your most overrated movie?
Oh boy. That's a good question. It's hard. You got to be careful what movies you talk about, because then you run into somebody who worked on it. Oh man, I'm trying.
It can be an old movie, something that likelihood of running into somebody would be bad.
There's a David O. Russell movie, and I can't think of the title right now, but it's with Amy Adams and Christian Bale.
I don't think I know this movie.
The title's escaping me. It's a period piece. It's like a 70s. Somebody will know it, but the title's escaping me. But yeah, this the one movie that I almost wanted to walk out of. It'll hit me at some point, I'm sure.
Okay, so if it hits you, then come back to it, and we'll come back to it. Cool. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate, anytime we get a chance to talk about the film industry, it's a good time. So I'm a second year DG8 trainee right now. The Directors Guild of America, which is the Directors Union, has a training program where they basically they train up people who want to be assistant directors specifically. And so it's a long application process. And I can talk more about it later. But basically, I'm working as a trainee now. They place you on projects in the film industry, so they tell you where to go, and then you meet, the AD team that you've been paired up with, and you work for the duration of that project, and then they'll place you somewhere else. So I'm in my second year of that now. My most recent placing was season 2 of HBO's The Righteous Gemstones, where I was running background.
Cool. So, Darrell, do you have anything that you want to?
Yeah, let me jump in, because Luke is being very modest. Okay, I've known Luke for about 6 years now, and the DGA Trainee Program is very hard to get into. They have about 1,000 applicants every year, and they take 6. Okay, so Luke has knocked it out of the ballpark, and not only is he an incredibly talented filmmaker in all aspects, but he's a heck of a guy. And so I could just go on to a lot of things he's done and all that, but I'm going to let him talk about it. And one of the things, Luke, I was thinking that might be kind of fun for a lot of the guys to hear about is just how you kind of broke in and the ups and downs of that journey and your first gigs and what did work for you, what didn't work, and what kind of things you learned along the way. So if you want to dive in, that'd be really nice.
Sure. Yeah. So my first job that I got paid for, I was as a boom operator on a really tiny film called Indivisible, and that was out in Tennessee, and then it was in California. It moved around a little bit, and I didn't have a whole lot of experience as a boom operator, but I was willing to do it. It was a spot that they needed, and my thought process was it was something I knew a little bit about. And that if I was a boom operator, I'd be able to be a lot closer to the set than I would as a production assistant. And so I found that to be true. And while I was working, I was always able to kind of watch rehearsals and stand close to the set and watch the director interact with the cast and the cast interact with the AD and all those different dynamics and those different relationships. And so while I did want to be a production assistant, I want to work in production for that specific job that actually benefited me a lot. I learned so much through that one experience. And partway through that job, one of my buddies I had been working with turned to me and he said, out of the blue, he just said, "Hey, do you want to go work in Hawaii?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then he said, "Okay, cool." And then we didn't talk about it for like another day or two. And it turned out we had a mutual friend and who said there was a few opportunities in Hawaii. And so I kind of got myself all psyched up to go. And I was emailing back and forth with the production supervisors, whoever was hiring, and I decided that I was going to move out to Hawaii for an interview, which was probably, in hindsight, was not a very secure decision.
But that's bold. That's very bold. Good for you. Yeah, I think it takes that.
It's hard to tell on the backside whether it was courage or naivete, but whatever it was, it happened to work out. But so I moved out to Hawaii for an interview, and I interviewed for this show. And I got to my interview, and they're like, "Do you have a car?" And I was like, "I don't have a car. I just got here." And they're like, "Do you know the island?" I was like, "I don't know the island. I just got here." And they're like, "Do you have a lot of experience in film and television?" I was like, "I don't. I just got here to the film industry." And so they're like, "Okay, you're a great prospective candidate. Thank you for your time." And so I was like super bummed out. But then that show ended up not even happening. That show went under to scheduling conflicts. And so then I was in Hawaii staying with a family of a friend of a friend that I had never met before. And the one job that I was out there to interview didn't end up happening. So then I kind of scrambled and I got the contact for one of the ADs on Hawaii 5-0. And I just emailed him a bunch and texted him, and I was like, "Hey, I'm available if you need help." And it just so happened that he needed somebody, and he had a spot to fill. And Hawaii, it's when there's not a whole lot of production assistants out there, and so he reached out to me, and I started day playing on that, like working whenever he needed me. And a few weeks later, they brought me on full time.
That's right. Can I ask you a question? Because I'm asked this a lot. When does persistence, because you talk about you were just emailing this guy at Hawaii 5-0 and you were persistent. When did you find, or how did you know when you were being too persistent or when it was working for you?
Gosh, it's hard. It's really hard because I think on the other side of it too, I think it's difficult because I have to look at it from my perspective and from his perspective, because he was the only person I was reaching out to, and so I just felt like I just kept, emailing him, and I think, and I was worried about it. But I think on the other hand, I was thinking from his perspective, he's an AD, he's a second AD. So his email box is like, if he doesn't see something in, within the hour it comes in, it's already to the bottom. And if he doesn't know the name, that's not even, in the top 20 things that he has to do that day is respond to that email. So I kind of gave myself like a little bit of time in between each email, and I would kind of craft, like a similar but different, like kind of approach.
Basically a short email. Did you put something special in the subject line? Did you
just that I had been just PA work for, or available PA for this, because I know that's one of the things he was thinking about is I need to fill this spot. And I had mentioned at the top of the email who it was who had recommended me, who had worked with him before. Yeah. So he saw a familiar name and was willing to read the rest of the email. And then eventually I just got a text that said, "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. this location."
Yeah.
I think that means I have at least one day.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think persistence is key and not being pushy at the same time. Did you find that you ended up using that process more of a shotgun effect as well as you went out further and trying to get, you didn't just hit one AD, you reached out to several, or how did that work out for you?
Well, I think for me, I only knew the one person, and it was only through that one contact. That was my only contact, and
Gotcha.
and especially being on an island, it was a unique situation because he was one of the few ADs working, And so I just connected with him. But then pretty much since then, all of my work since then has all been referrals. I think one of the cool things about the film industry is that it's one of the last industries that's really all word of mouth. I don't think I've ever gotten a job off of a resume. I always have one. You always have to have a production resume just to send in, so people know that you're not some like green person who's just just started. Depending on what job they're hiring you for. So I've always had a production resume, and I've had a few jobs where they ask you to submit it just so they can get an idea of what you're doing. But that's never been, I think, the reason that I've gotten the job. It's always been because somebody who I've worked with has said to somebody they worked with, "Hey, I worked with him. He's cool," or "He can do this," or "He can do that," and that's what they go off of. So I think that's one of the great advantages of the film industry is that once you kind of break in, if you work on one television show, especially something like a network show, you'll work with 3, 4, 5 ads because they'll bring in additional ads to work with. Specifically in production, you'll work with different people will cycle through and you'll meet them, and then when you're reaching out to somebody, you're reaching out to somebody who you've worked with, not just somebody whose name you've been given. So it really was for me just that one job. And then if you work hard enough at making sure you introduce yourself properly and those people that are kind of cycling through, then from there you can kind of build your own network.
So you're on Hawaii 5-0 and you get in that gig. What happens next? And I'm curious, like a twofold question. You did that, you jumped to another show right after that, as I recall, and then somewhere along the way you decided to go up for the DG8 Trainee Program. So it's kind of maybe these guys would like to hear about that.
Yeah, so I had applied before I moved out to Hawaii. I had applied for the DGA Training Program. I actually did not get in the first year that I applied. I made it to there's an interview. There's a physical application, and then after the physical application, there is a test, an online test that's like a skills test and like a personality test, and that's a few hours long, and you have to submit that. And then a few weeks later, depending on how you scored on that test, they'll do an in-person interview. And my first year, I went to the first in-person interview. And then if you get through the first round of interviews, there's a final interview. And I didn't get to the final interview my first round, my first year applying. But it was encouraging that I got in at least to the first interview.
Yeah.
And so I decided I'll apply again next year. So I moved out to Hawaii, and then while I was working on Hawaii 5-0, I applied to my second year. I submitted my second year's application to the training program, but it takes months. It's months and months of waiting because it's you submit your application, you wait a month. You take the test, you wait a month. You interview, you wait a month. You interview again, you wait a month, and then they tell you. So it's a really long process. And thankfully, I had one of the ADs I worked with, Rich Sickler, in Hawaii. He's a great first AD. He had been in the LA training program, and he was one of the ones who wrote my recommendation, and he was one of the people I was working for when I applied. And so he understood, and he gave me, they kind of gave me a leave of absence. They're like, "You have to go interview. You can do that." But yeah, so for a lot of that time, while I was working out there, I was in Hawaii for about a year. I was waiting to hear back about the second year. But yeah, I did. I left Hawaii 5-0, and then right as Hawaii 5-0 was ending, they were shooting the pilot for the reboot of Magnum PI.
Oh yeah.
And so I basically I had no days off. I went right from one to the other, and I did just that 1 week. I was there for the second unit, which I think is sometimes a lot more fun. The second unit, it's a lot less actors. So there's a lot less personalities and a lot more explosions. So depending on what you're into, second unit can sometimes be the place to be. But yeah, so then after that show, that pilot, I got a call from an AD who was working on a film called Triple Frontier, which was actually the film that I had interviewed for when I first got to the island, that had went down due to scheduling conflicts.
Oh.
They had figured all the scheduling conflicts out, and they had come back. And at that point, I had been working in Hawaii for about 9 months, and so I went from me interviewing for an office PA job, which I didn't even really want to be an office PA. I wanted to be on set. I wanted to be close to the action. To them calling me about an on-set production assistant job. And it's just really cool how everything kind of sometimes things just work out. but I was super excited to do that, and so then I did that for for a month or so.
So
In
you were
Hawaii.
basically working job to job quite a bit.
Yeah, they called me and they asked me when my last day on Magnum PI was, and I said it's a Saturday. We're working a Saturday, and that's our last day, and we'll be working till like 2 a.m. And on Saturday. And they said, okay, great, you can have all of Sunday off, and then Monday you start on the feature. And I was like, oh, great, cool.
That's
So
great. So you did the
so
feature, and then I know at some point, when did you bolt and you were back in New York working, or
yeah,
you
so
want?
it was right after that summer. I think it's 2018, the summer of 2018. So right after then, going into that fall, I
Yeah.
found out I was accepted into the training program, and so that fall, like I had to, I basically moved. I was being a production assistant is just a surprise to no one. You don't make a lot of money, and so when I flew out to New York for my final interview, it's incredibly expensive flying from Hawaii for Honolulu to New York. And so basically, what I did is I packed up all of my stuff in boxes as though I was moving, and I put shipping labels on them, and I flew out to do my final interview because I couldn't afford to fly back and then fly in again. And so I interviewed, and I was waiting with my fingers crossed to see if I could get it, and then I did, and then I just had my roommates ship the boxes that I had packed.
Wow.
But it would have been really upsetting to go back to Hawaii with all the boxes packed and have to unpack them. So, but yeah, so that was kind of my plan. So then, yeah, that fall I started the DGA training program.
Even you talking about how you figured out the whole shipping thing and doing all that just tells me and reminds us what this kind of job is entailing anyway. When you're always having to think, weeks ahead when you're in production and how something's going to roll out. So you then you started working in New York, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So once I started in the training program, they placed me. My first job was a network television show for CBS for iProductions called Bull, which is like a drama procedural with Michael Weatherly and Chris Jackson, a few other guys. And so that was my first job, and it was a very steep learning curve. It felt more like a right angle, like straight up.
What?
But
Why? What was that about? And how was that different from Hawaii?
so when I was working in Hawaii, I did my whole run of Hawaii 5.0 as what's called a walkie PA or radio PA, and you're basically responsible for all of the radios on set, which is it's very much like a grunt task because people in other departments don't particularly take good care of their radios. And so and as a production assistant in general, you really have 10 times the responsibility than you do the authority. You have almost no authority, and yet you have a whole lot of responsibility. So you're responsible for making sure that every radio comes back at the end of a season, but you have no authority to try to try and leverage against anyone to give. You're basically just pleading, please, I want to keep my job. Please hand in your radio at the end of the season. So I had done a lot of radio work, and you get that specific position allows you a lot of opportunity to be floating around, because in the beginning of the day, at the end of the day was when you're busy. You're handing out the radios, and then you're keeping track of them. You're collecting the radios, and you're charging batteries and stuff. But you get to be around set. You get to be in your monitor. You get to do a lot of different stuff where you can you kind of have mobility, whereas other jobs kind of keep you tethered to one specific spot. But when I moved to New York, there's actually a production assistant position that's unique to New York called the paperwork PA. In other areas, it's kind of a combination of the base camp AD or the base camp PA and the first team position. So it's kind of like a base camp AD will do like first team stuff, which is our actors that are in their trailers. They'll kind of help out with that, and then they'll also do a little bit of the paperwork. And then so that's like the LA system, and so then the first team PA in LA will really only be on set, and the base camp AD will get the actors ready in the morning and send them to them. In New York, the way the system's set up is there'll be two kind of first team PAs, one of them in base camp, and then one of them on set, and they'll all handle the cast pretty much exclusively. And the paperwork PA is in charge of the back of the call sheet. A lot of the times you'll do, sometimes you'll help with the front of the call sheet, depending on who your AD is. And then you do a PR every day, a production report, which is, so the call sheet's everything that's planned for that day. and then the production reports would actually happen that day. So a lot of times you're kind of having to rectify what were we trying to do and what do we actually do and how do I represent that? And it also has all of the times for all of the crew members that day, which is how all the crew members get paid. So they have their own time cards that they submit, but then the production report has to match those time cards. And so it can be very stressful. It's very, very heavy into paperwork, and you have to be kind of like an Excel wizard a little bit. And so that was brand new territory for me. I had kind of, I'd always been kind of working. I was in the jungles lugging around, cases of walkie-talkies and batteries. And then, my next job, I was basically in an office just furiously typing away, trying to get these like meticulous documents all sorted. So there's a huge span of responsibilities within, the different responsibilities PAs can have. And it was totally new for me. And because I hadn't worked in New York before, I didn't really know much about the position. I knew that it existed, but it's kind of a daunting task.
Well, since this is also bringing up false takes, do you want to share something along the way that it sounds like that was pretty intense? I also know that what you're learning is what these guys at the top, the ADs who are working with major producers, they get all this information. They learn it at the level that you've been working in, and you're able to step and climb up very quickly in the industry. At least a lot of the guys I knew when they started out, and where they are now running Marvel movies and things like that. So what do you have to share with these guys about
I guess
challenges?
one of the first things that I was when I first started, I was really embarrassed to ask for help because I felt that I should be able to do it, and I should be able to take care of my own stuff. And I know everyone else is so busy, and they are, that you feel guilty asking anybody for their time because they don't even have enough time to do what they're trying to do, let alone, help you with the stuff that you're trying to do. And so I kind of had resolved almost myself. I was like, whatever it is, I'll figure it out myself. And it was a horrible idea because you can't do that at the beginning. You need help. And I kind of didn't. I underestimated how generous people were going to be about understanding that you're just starting out and that you need that assistance, and that's what they were when they started out too. And so it kind of took me until I was able to ask, like, hey, do you have any tricks to how to do this thing? And they're like, oh yeah. So I was putting in everything manually on the back of the production report, for example. And then somebody showed me, you can kind of code it so that you put it in up here and it just automatically fills out, and it'll save you maybe like an hour and a half at the end of your night. And it'll make sure everything's all linked together so it's all right. And I was just like, oh, that's great to know. Had I asked for help earlier, I would have saved all that time. So there was a specific day, I think, where I left the office at like my 22nd hour because I was in the production office finishing this production report. And of course, I'm sending it to a lot of people, but to the producers get it. The unit production manager, the UPM, will get it. The production supervisor, all these people get this document that gets sent out at the end of the night. And so I want it to be as correct as I don't want to have a typo, and depending on who your unit production manager is, sometimes they'll say, hey, this font is different than this font over here. Can you correct that, please? Because I don't like that. And so some people are very, very, particular, and you want to be impressive. And so I was working on this document, and I was like, I was like 18 hours in, and I was so focused on the document I hadn't saved it, and the whole thing crashed, and I lost the whole thing at like my 18th hour, and I'm alone in the office. Everything's dark except for the lamp on my desk, and I just sat there, and I sat there for maybe about 10 minutes, feeling sorry for myself, and then I opened up a blank document and I started all over again. And so it's just like, so just understanding, like, just getting good at that stuff and giving yourself, like, grace and not being afraid to ask for help. Because, like, you want to be that person that people are like, oh, I can rely on him. He knows how to do it. But you can't be that person immediately. Somebody has to, at some point, has to show you how to do it before you do that. So that was a huge lesson for me.
Always save, always back up, right?
Yeah.
Immediately.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So where are you now? What's happening right now in your life as far as next? Are you come June? Are you then officially done with the DGA program, and do you have projects coming up?
Well, we'll see. I'm not sure, exactly what the timeline is. We're kind of on a bit of a hiatus from the Righteous Gemstones right now, and so I'm just kind of, sitting by for an update on that. That's the last project I was working on, and that's in Charleston, South Carolina. And
okay.
so that's where they're filming that show, that HBO show. So so it's all kind of relative to the end of that project, because everyone's got to within the training program. So if you want to be an AD, regardless of the training program, a lot of people know you have to catalog 600 days. So what I mean by catalog is you have to have a production report that has your name on it, and then you have to have a pay stub from when you worked, and a lot of times you have to have a call sheet. So you have a call sheet, pay stub, and production report from every given day that you've worked on a union set, and so you tally all those up, and once you reach 600 days, you can submit that book. Putting together my book is like a common phrase, and you'll submit that and send it to the DGA, and they'll go through it, and they actually go through it day by day, and see and make sure that everything qualifies. Sometimes commercials, only certain commercials will qualify for a day, and stuff like that. So people will build over the course of a few years sometimes this pamphlet. One of the draws of the training program is you don't necessarily have to do that, but you do have to do like 350 days at least inside the training program. So it's really more about when those days are, when you've completed those 350 days, as opposed to when a given amount of time goes by.
So given that information, then do you advise people to do union work only, or non-union, or does it?
I mean, it's a difficult, if you want to. I mean, if you want to become a production assistant if you want to become an AD and you want to put together your days, then yeah, you're looking for as many union days as you can, but it's also a difficult balance, because you don't want to turn away non-union work when you need it, just to wait to see if something else comes around, so it's difficult. So everyone's kind of going to make those decisions for themselves. Thankfully, I found that once you kind of if you can find yourself in a circle of people that would do, that do network television, or that do, even premium television, like those circles, a lot of the times those ADs and those UPMs, those guys will go on to work on similar projects. So if you can get in with one of those shows with that group, you can kind of tend to, if that becomes your network, the people around you kind of dictate what kind of projects you work on. So you can definitely kind of angle towards that if you know that's what you want to do. But I also know people who are more interested in writing and directing their own stuff, and so they'll look more for just whatever the next job is they can find to save up enough money to fund their own projects, because it's almost it's sometimes being a production assistant feels like you've taken a vow of poverty because you see other people who are like shooting their own short films and submitting them to festivals, and it's great, and you're here working 18-hour days on a project. But for me, the strategic advantage is like the people I'm learning from are the people who are making the things that I want to watch, like the directors that I'm getting, like you sit down at lunch next to a director. That happened to me. I was working on a HBO show, and I got talking to our director. His name's Matt Shackman, and I was talking to him. It was like we're just chatting about lunch and about directing, and talking about different theories about stuff, and I didn't realize until after somebody's like, "Do you know who he is?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And they're like, "You should look him up on IMDb." And he had just recently directed like an acclaimed episode of Game of Thrones. And so I was like, "Oh, that's cool." So it's like you never know who the people that you're running into are. And so, granted, I was a production assistant or a trainee at that time, so I'm not writing and producing my own content. But the people I get to talk to and the people who I get information from are people who are making the kind of things that you might want to see. And for me, that's kind of invaluable. So that was kind of the saving grace when you're not making a lot of money and you kind of feel like you're at the bottom of the totem pole. Like you have to also balance that between the opportunities and the people that you're getting to learn from, which you don't always get on a small independent set.
If I could jump in? So you're talking about learning from people, who have done big stuff. So when you first got into the DGA training program, how was that experience getting to be around people at that level that maybe you hadn't encountered before? Was it intimidating? What did it look like? What did they require of you? All that kind of stuff.
Well, it's funny you say that. The interview for the DGA training program, the first interview is like a one-on-one. It's like almost like they outsource it to a firm that like kind of like analyze people. So it's a little nerve-wracking, but they'll like kind of like it's a professional interviewer, and he'll ask you a bunch of questions and strange questions that catch you off guard. And then if you make it past that, the second interview is a panel where you're basically sitting at the head of a huge oval table in the DGA building in New York City on 57th, and around the table are like 12 DGA members who are who help run that program and who help oversee that program, and these are people who have a credit list a mile long of all the projects they've worked on and the things they've seen, and so it is kind of a little intimidating, but at the same time, I think when you have any experience in production, you're kind of almost inoculated to like like these big personalities, because you meet people who have big personalities and big big personas, and they live up to them because they are they are that, and you have people who think they are that, and you have to deal with all those people equally. And so, funny enough, when I got to that interview, that setting that was can be very nerve-wracking. It was pretty calm for me. I was just talking, because as a production assistant, you have to get used to talking to producers, and sometimes executive producers. They'll come over and they'll ask you a question and expect you to have the answer. So even on smaller projects, you kind of get get used to that, and if you can get good at that, then that kind of translates everywhere. So thankfully it was it's pretty run of the mill. Actually, I would be more nervous on a set having somebody ask me to do something, but once I was sitting in an office, I was like, oh, I can do this. I can answer questions.
We have one question from chat so far, which is a little bit off topic from what you were just talking about, but I'm sure it'll come back around. Katie wants to know what movies or TV shows inspired you to be a part of the industry.
Oh, that's a great question. I gotta say, my favorite one of my favorite films that I keep going back to. I just got a chance to watch it the other day. Is a film called Road to Perdition. It's a Sam Mendes movie, and I don't see it pop up on a lot of favorite film lists, but that was the first movie I saw that it really clicked for me. That film wasn't just entertainment, but it was really an art form, and that really changed the game for me, because I think thinking about the idea of pursuing like any kind of career in film always kind of seemed a little frivolous. I was just like, I don't know if that's what I want to do with my life. Like, it just didn't seem important, and because I'd always seen it as kind of like an entertainment, and when I saw that movie, I was really kind of turned on my head about that. And I was like, oh, this can be an art form. Like, if you do it well, it can be really powerful and really, and really incredible. And so that was the movie for me that kind of changed the way I thought about it. And I was like, I could feel really good about being a part of making something. If I could ever be a part of making something like that, I could feel really good about it. And so that was probably the movie that made the biggest difference for me. And then also just for me, it was actually even more, I think, than the films themselves. I loved the behind the scenes, like all the special, the bonus features and all that stuff. I used to watch those more than the movies, because there was something ineffable about like the kinetic energy on set, and then like the family, the community, the camaraderie between the people. Like, even when you just see a snapshot of the camera operator talking to the dolly grip and joking around and busting each other up, you just kind of could see it, and there was just something special about it. And I just remember latching on to be like, I want to be there. I want to do that. Like, whether I'm sweeping up or doing whatever, like, I want to be a part of that. That's cool, and they're making cool stuff. And so for me, it was a combination of different movies that I loved, but then also just seeing that the film industry, the behind the scenes, could be that kind of like family community. Always dysfunctional, but usually a family community.
I think that's part of the magic of filmmaking, that we get to be in that community, make friends, and still be able to create art. I think, boy, you hit on something really beautiful right there. I know that's what's driven me, since I was young, to want to do this as well, and also have days where you're not eating a lot, and then there are days where it's bounty, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's good. I know one part of the idea of the show is to talk about the false takes and mistakes that you've made, and I was thinking of things, and at first I was like, oh, I can't think of any mistakes I've made at all. No, they came very quickly and in great numbers, but I thought I'd tell a funny story. So when I was starting out working as a production assistant. This is when I was working on a feature, and we were working with animals, and I had done some animal work before, but I'd never worked. We were working with mules, and so they were telling us about how to be careful and how to act around the mules, and the piece of advice they gave us is they said, make sure that you speak to the mule when you're walking behind them, so that they know that you're there, because if you sneak up on them, they're liable to kick you because they think you're trying to sneak up on them. So just talk to the mule as you're walking around it, and then it'll know you're there and you'll be fine. That was like the one big rule. They were like, don't touch them, and just talk to them. And this is kind of I guess goes towards like having some kind of decorum around actors. But so I come behind this mule, and I'm carrying a bunch of waters. So I have an armful of waters. I'm sure I hadn't loaded them well, and they're all like precarious. And I'm walking over these rocks. It's like this trail out in the jungle, and I get about 2 feet behind this mule, and I remember that I'm supposed to be talking to the mule, and so I just blurted out like, "Hello, Mr. Mule." And I turn the corner of the front of the mule, and I stare, and Ben Affleck's looking right at me with the most unamused look in his face. And I was just trying to get into character or something, but just like, what are you doing? And I just had like all these waters in my hand, and I just pivoted and I walked away. So that was early on, and I've kind of since had some kind of learned some kind of decorum and understanding, just like understanding where you are in relation to different people, especially if they're trying to work on lines and stuff. But so you never know. So the people always talk about how glamorous it is to work in film because you get to work with all these big stars. It's like, but you also got to remember your embarrassing moments are also in front of those big stars.
Katie also asked, how long was the application process from applying to getting accepted? What like from beginning to end?
Yeah, maybe about 6 months in total, from submitting the application to finding out that I got in. Maybe about 6 months or so, because there is a long process, because they have a lot of applications to go. Every process takes a little less time because they're weeding through fewer people, but they have to take a lot of, they kind of go through all those applications with a fine tooth comb. I know that they said, they told me that I heard somewhere that they were throwing out applications that had typos in them. So no matter what your application looked like, if it had a typo in it, it was just, they wouldn't read it, because they were only trying to deal with people who are very detail oriented, very, like very careful, and we're taking time in their applications. And so have to go through all those applications by hand. And they were, I don't know if they're still doing it. They were all paper applications. You had to mail them in when I applied. I don't know if it's gone digital now, but then, and you have to take your tests. And so they have to go through the test results, and then they'll weigh the test results against the application, like they'll kind of weigh both of those. So it is a long process, but so it's a lot more waiting than it is doing anything. But for me, I was working as a production assistant already, and so my thought process, well, like if I don't get in, I'll just make my days working as a production assistant. But it can't hurt to apply. It's free to apply. You don't have to pay. The only expense is trying to get out there for the interview. And I was like, and that's if I make it that far. So it's kind of, for me, it was like there's no harm in applying, because even if I don't get in, I'm still working at it through this other route. And it ended up not even being faster for me, because by the time I'll graduate my 350 days in the training program, I'll have done more than my 600 days. So it won't actually have gotten me there any quicker. But I certainly have a million more connections than I would have if I had tried to do it the other way.
Cool. So Darren would like to know, would like for you to compare and contrast working on professional sets from a few years ago when you were just in film school and just like hoping to be, in the film industry one day, like, you were doing those kinds of sets versus now. How alike or different are those sorts of things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think after I'd worked on my first few projects, my first few non-union projects, I felt pretty good about what I understood and what I knew, and like how things worked. and then my first union project, which was Hawaii Five-0, everything went out the window. It's a different. Everyone has their own opinion on it, but I just think it's a different level. It's like a whole other occupation for me, because there's so many complications that are thrown in once things are union. There's so many more rules, so things are less flexible, but you have to do the same amount of stuff, and so it can really be very difficult. But I think it's a whole other level of it's a different thing. I think obviously independent film has its place, and I love a lot of independent films, and the majority of my work since then, all of my work since Hawaii Five-0 has been union. But I just remember kind of like my eyes just going wide and just being like, oh, there's a lot more here than I thought there was, because I thought I kind of knew how sets worked from an independent perspective, and it didn't prepare me at all for what it was like to work on a professional set. All the even just the lingo, like the jargon and all the terms that are used that you don't necessarily always hear on an independent set, and all the expectations of things you should just know inherently are like that, because independent work, a lot of times you're working with more green people, sometimes there's more volunteer work, and so the expectations on a union set are like, how to do your job and how to do it well. And so kind of jumping into that, I think was very unique. But yeah, I maintain that I think anybody who, having even worked in New York, there's so much responsibility placed on production assistants in New York, even more so than I think other places. And I think any decent key set PA in New York City that works on premium television, network television, or films in New York, I think could first AD an independent feature. They just you get that much experience, and that much is required of you. That's a really intense position.
Cool. Darrell, do you have anything?
Yeah, jumping off that. So these guys are, obviously a lot of the people jumping out in the field right out of film school and things that are going to only be getting possibly right out the bat non-union work and looking at independent productions. So what resources would you have for them? I know I sort of, in my beginning, I immediately first worked on union films. So I didn't know any difference about the non-union side of it. And I think there's a lot to learn on the non-union. What would you recommend for them to make that leap? Are there resources? Are there links they go to? Like you talked about the terminology and all the different things. And I know when you're dealing with SAG and WGA and the Producers Guild, and there's just a ton of terms that you're not going to cover in a non-union independent film. And I think that's a really good learning curve for them. Do you recommend any places they should get some training on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard. I'm trying to think of I think so much of it is just like experience. The one thing I will say though is that there's a tremendous, when I was applying to a training program specifically, just like YouTube was a tremendous resource. So many people are talking about like what they learned, or like different Instagram accounts of what it's like to be, like I followed like key grips that have Instagram accounts, and they talk about, and you can watch just like what they're doing and what they're building. Like if you want to work, like if you want to do that, if you want to work as a grip, you can follow Chapman Leonard on Instagram. You can follow Pee Wee Dollies on Instagram. You can see what that's like, and you can follow these these huge companies, these huge rental companies, and they're always posting videos of what's the latest equipment, what are we using, and I think the people are more accessible now than they ever were. So if like looking people up on IMDb, like if you don't know people in person, like find somebody in a niche, like in a niche industry, somebody that doesn't get reached out to a lot, that might be doing what you're doing. And just reach out to them, especially now. A lot of people are home. Like it's a good opportunity to to reach out to those people and talk to them and pick their brain. A lot of people, I would say everyone got to where they were in the film industry through somebody else. Nobody did it entirely on their own. And so I think a lot of people, more than maybe, it's known as being a gruff industry. Sometimes people are very prickly, and they're hard to deal with, and they're tired and they're working long hours. But I've seen the other side of that too, where people are really willing to jump in and help out, especially when somebody's trying to break into the industry. So I would say just like there's so many resources there. just on YouTube and on Instagram of people sharing what their experiences are on film sets. I mean, even people who aren't supposed to be posting about their daily life, like because there's all kinds of rules now about like you can't post Instagram pictures of a set. People do it anyway, and you can find it, and you can find it out there, and you won't get in trouble for watching it. And so you can see a clip that somebody took of a picture, and you can see, oh, that's how I know that's on that movie set. That's how that DP is lighting that shot. That's really interesting, and you can pull stuff from there. I know I had a friend I worked with a DIT in Hawaii, who it turns out a bunch of my friends were following on Instagram because he posted like a lot of stuff about how what it was like to do his job, and I posted a picture of him, and they're like, oh, that guy? We follow his Instagram, and so they were pulling stuff and learning stuff from him. Mm-hmm. So they were learning stuff from him. So I think now more than ever, people are accessible, and they're sharing what they know. And I think the film industry is known for being very closed and very they have all these special names for all these things to protect their union, so that people who are in the union know how to do the job and people who aren't don't. But now more than ever, I think people are accessible through those platforms. So just with IMDb, you can find who's doing the job you want to do, and try and get in touch with them, try and follow them.
Yeah, and I know independent productions too that are non-union with a ton of either union people or people who have skill sets that are up at that level, who are actually also coming on board a film because they want to get behind the film. And sometimes, I know for me, it was pretty much you're thrown in there and you just start learning, like what you're talking about. You just pick it up, you learn it, and you make mistakes as you go. But I mean, I can't imagine any other industry to be in that allows you that kind of opportunity to go from one job to the next and just continue learning as you're going.
Yeah.
Hope I turn my mic on. So we've got one more question from chat. Do you have any advice for someone who might be thinking about applying to be a DGA trainee?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think understanding what the program is for and communicating that in your application, I think, is a big deal. I think a lot of people see DGA Training Program and they think, oh, that's how I can get to become a director. While there's no direct route to becoming a director, there's no apprenticeship you can take that'll get you right there. The DGA Training Program is not for people who it's not going to help you become a director. It's geared towards helping people become an assistant director. So having any kind of understanding of that position, I think, is important, and then and kind of communicating that in their application, because I think they do get a lot of applications from people who are hopeful that they can graduate the film program, be considered a member of the DGA, and then go start directing things. And it's just a totally different skill set. There's no reason that you can't that you can't move from one to the other, but the program's certainly not going to help you get there. So I think people who have a firm understanding of what the program is and what the program's trying to help teach you, and if you can communicate that in your application, and again, make sure that your application is completely free of any kind of typo or anything like that. Send it to the people that that are the most grammatically inclined, and have everyone look over it and submit that, because that'll go a long way. And just being honest in the test. The test had a lot of questions that kind of almost tried to trip you up, as far as asking you specific personality questions. Just be honest, because I think some people also just get in their own head about how would an AD answer these questions, and I'll answer it that way, so they think I'm going to be an AD. And I think you do yourself a disservice, because if you answer the test honestly, and maybe they don't accept you, it could be because maybe being an AD isn't what you think it's going to be, and maybe you're not suited specifically to be an assistant director. Maybe you're suited to do something different. And so that's kind of what I do, is I just approach the questions honestly, and I happened to get through the next round. And so that kind of also for me was was a little bit of an affirmation that it's like, oh, you're kind of compatible with this job, which was encouraging, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get accepted and be a few weeks into the training program and realize, oh, this isn't what I want to do at all, and then you've taken a spot that somebody else would have wanted.
When you had to take the test again, you had to take that questionnaire again, correct?
Yeah.
Did you try to remember what you said the first time, or?
No, I didn't. I think, I just tried to answer each question. You don't have an incredible amount of time. There's the first whole, I don't know how much I'm supposed to say about. I mean, anyone who's taken the test once, I'm sure it's all out there online. But the first part of the test is actually very puzzle based. I think it's designed to test what's called like your liquid intelligence, which is like how you respond to different stimulus like in the moment, and how you problem solve in the moment.
Wow.
So rather than how you can like study information, retain it, and then apply it, it's how do you think, how do you process, how do you understand, how do you get in information and then translate it and put out a solution. And so that kind of part of the test takes a lot of time, and you don't really have a whole lot of time to kind of think.
Right.
I think you do better in any kind of personality test if you just don't think about it too much. But yeah, no, I couldn't. It had been a year. I couldn't remember how I answered, but I tried to answer honestly both times. So hopefully they were.
That's good. It worked. Whatever. It worked.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And they also don't ever release the scores to you, so you never know. Like when people ask me, like, "What should I do on the test?" I'm just like, I don't know. I guess just answer it honestly and do your best, because they never tell you what you scored or what questions you got right or wrong. They never release that to you, so I don't have anything too helpful on that front.
I remember in the early 1980s when I was in New York, I knew guys who were going through the program. I mean, this thing has been around for a long time, and it's the same sort of thing. It just really brings the right people, it seems, together, and it's challenging. And those who get in and usually go on to do wonderful things. Not that the people that don't get in, they also get to go on and do things. I think it's just an extra, extra handshake into the program or into the business, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And that was one of the things that was nice when the first year I applied and I didn't get in, they sent me a nice letter that was saying, like, just because you haven't got in this year or that you haven't got into the program doesn't mean that you wouldn't make a great AD or, a great addition to the film, the film industry, which just means that specifically that that's not what we're looking for this year. So, and I think also applying multiple times says something to them about how serious you are about it. So I think if they're looking at two different people and one person's applying for the second time and one person's applying for the first time, all things being equal, I think they'll probably take the person applying for the second time. So,
and truthfully, I've never heard of anyone getting in the first time.
Yeah, I know a few of the people that were in my year but they were the minority for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's great.
Cool. Well, I don't have any more questions from chat right now. That doesn't mean they're not going to pop in, but we're going to wrap up here in about 10 minutes. So if anybody in chat has any lingering questions that you want to get in, make sure you get them in now. But in the meantime, Luke, do you have anything that you want to add that we haven't really asked you about?
I guess you just talk about it's interesting because as production people, you're kind of geared towards going all the time, like go, without a second to pause. And so, like having a little hiatus right now and having some time has given me a lot of time. But so I just encourage anyone who's not working right now to just find a bunch of books that you haven't read about whatever it is you're trying to do. I'm reading this book right now by William Goldman, Adventures in the Screen Trade. And it's really fascinating. I thought it was going to be mostly about writing, which is kind of what I wanted to read about. And it turned out the first third of the book is like an anthology, like a history of film and cinema and like the golden age of film. And he breaks down everything from like what a studio executive is and all that stuff, which is kind of a different experience to what what I'm used to seeing on set. So it's really, really interesting. But I really enjoyed finding different books and reading different things from people about the film industry, because it's one of the things you hardly ever have time to do, when you're in the middle of a production schedule.
One of the things I've told some folks who are going into the business, they're not sure about which side, if they want to be in production their whole time or not. I tell them a lot about the fact that you can always, well, not always, you hopefully can get into the studio system. If that's something you want to do, and you're kind of in that fence where you're working with all the studio execs who are coming on the film, who are coming in from Paramount or Warner Brothers, and you're working sort of under them, but not under them. You're working under the ADs that you work for. What have you taken away from that? I had the luxury of working in the studio system for a while, and there's a lot of opportunity there. What is your kind of advice to folks who are going into the business and looking at other options as opposed to just always being on set?
Yeah, I think there's just something to be said for just having integrity about the way that you go about things. I think you see a lot of people, in every position level, like from the top all the way down, who feel trapped by the need to perform, and they allow themselves to kind of to throw other people under the bus, to kind of worm around. And those people will get they'll get so far, but eventually, if you're working with the right people, that those people won't get promoted. And so I think a lot of what for all the embarrassing moments I've had, a lot of my success has just been where I have no experience. I'll just replace it with honesty, and I'll just be I'll be as honest as I can. And I found it's actually gotten me a lot farther than I had anticipated. And those are always the people that you want to work with, and people don't think about that so much. But when you're so much of what people are looking for in hiring somebody, whether it's for a writer's room, or if it's just somebody that they want to spend those hours with, because writer room hours can be grueling just as much as set hours can be grueling. Producers are always on call. They're always having phone calls with production managers and with different people. So if you're the kind of person that people want to be around, sometimes that'll trump the amount of experience you have. And a lot of that comes down to not just personality, but just like integrity. So just trying to, as kind of sometimes almost giving up trying to get ahead to just do, what's right, makes everything, bearable, because you'll work for people, and I have, who, you work for people who don't have your back, and if something happens, if you do something wrong, they'll make sure that everyone knows that you did something wrong. And I've also worked for people who will go to great lengths to cover for you, because as your boss, they see it as your responsibility. And then you can turn around, and if somebody who you're kind of delegating to messes up, then you take the responsibility for that. And that took me a little while to learn too, because I was so nervous going in about my reputation and starting to build my reputation, and that I didn't want anyone to think anything was my fault that wasn't. And I found, the sooner I turned it on my head and I covered for the people who I was delegating stuff to, my bosses do the same, and that made a big difference. And I made a lot of friends that way. And then you end up just getting jobs from friends. And it also just makes the job bearable, not even just as a strategic way to get ahead. But I found that there's two things. Everyone who's working in film, is my theory is everyone who just wants to get back to working and making movies with their friends, right? And so people who are independent films, you kind of get to choose your friends and staff up your project and go make it, and that's a beautiful thing. And you don't have that luxury when you're working in studio television, or features or premium television. You don't have that luxury because somebody else is hiring all of the staff. And so I think to achieve the same goal, what you can really do is just become friends with the people that are on set, like even if you don't know them. And it's a different way. Just make friends out of them. You're going to see them every day anyway. It's going to make everyone's life a whole lot easier, to find out what you have in common, make friends with them, and you're achieving the same thing. Because then at the end of the day, once you've made friends with all these people that you're going to be with for 9 months, then you're going to work and you're making movies with your friends. So just because they weren't, at the outset, doesn't mean they aren't now. And even from a selfish perspective, it made it. It makes 18-hour days, crazy load-ins, rain, snow, whatever, so much more bearable when you're doing it with your friends than I think you have. For the most part, you have a decision about whether they're going to be your friends or not. So,
honesty and integrity. Wow, that is a perfect way to wrap this up. Thank you, Luke. That was just wonderful.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
So, and speaking of, we are going to wrap this up, but before we do that, one more question from chat. Are you working on any personal projects right now? And I'm going to go ahead and dovetail into that and say, where can we find you online, and where can people connect with you if they need to, or if they want to?
That's a great question. I guess hold on, let me see. I don't even know what my Instagram handle is, which is something I should know. So on Instagram, I'm LAW_ITTEL. And that's probably what I'm on the most. And you can always feel free to reach out to me. I'll also give you, if you want to share my phone number and my email, I'm willing to give that out to if anyone wants to reach out and has questions about stuff. I know it's really hard for me, especially when applying to the training program, but just in general, to get the ear of somebody who had done anything and ask them questions, I think is a valuable resource. So in talking about how do you make your first step, how do you get advice, how do you talk to people if you don't know anyone? Well, now you know at least one person. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'll whatever little I've learned from my few years, I'm willing to share.
And can you give me that Instagram one more time?
It's LAW_ITTEL.
LAW_ITTEL.
Yep.
Cool.
And then I've been recently working on a project. I have a friend who's in a writing program out in LA. And she's in a program. I won't give her name, but she's in a program at UCLA, and they're all doing their classes via Zoom now. So she's been giving me the link to their classes every week, and I've been watching their, and I've been like kind of like showing up in their Zoom classes and taking a free UCLA class, and we've been writing a like a spec script together as like an exercise, and so it's been really interesting to hear what she's learning and kind of work together in a creative process. It's a lot easier, I find, to work on stuff when you have somebody else helping you stay accountable to deadlines.
Awesome. Well, Luke, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So
thanks for having me.
And Darrell, thank you for being my co-host today. This was awesome.
Oh, it's so much fun. Thank you, John.
And so this has been the False Takes podcast. And if you guys like the show, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. That really helps us out. And make sure that you mash that subscribe button so you know when we're doing it next. Next guest will be announced here probably in the next day or so. So make sure you follow us on Twitter. That's usually where we do that. And we'll be doing it next week. It's Monday, so we'll probably do it next Monday or Tuesday. And probably in the afternoon. But like I said, keep an eye on us on Twitter, and you will know when we have our next guest and who it's going to be. So thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate it. So I have been John. This is The False Takes, a show where we talk about art, film, and the mistakes we all make when we're creating something new. And we appreciate you listening. So you guys have a good week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, John. See you, Luke.
All right.